Welcome to aminacademy.com. Let us read Impact on British Rule in India. The British Raj significantly impacted India's economy, society, and political landscape, primarily through the exploitation of Indian resources, causing the widespread poverty, disrupting traditional industries, and introducing a centralized administration system while also enacting social reforms like abolishing practice like Sati, although these were often accompanied by further exploitation of the Indian populace. Ultimately, British rule laid the foundation for a unified Indian nationalism that led to independence. The key impact of British Raj. Economic impact. Deindustrialization. British policies led to the decline of Indian textile industries due to the influx of cheap machine made goods from England, causing widespread unemployment among artisans. Commercialization of agriculture. Introduction of a cash crops like cotton, indigo, and opium, often at the expense of food crops, leading to increase the landlessness and famines. Land revenue system. Policies like the permanent settlement created large scale land ownership dis- disparities and increased peasant exploitation. Infrastructure development. Construction of railroads facilitated British trade by primarily benefited the colonial powers. Social impact. Social reforms, abolition of particles like sati, child marriage, and female infanticide, although often driven by colonial interests. Caste system, while not actively abolished, the British administration interacted with the caste system in ways that sometimes exa- exacerbated its rigidity. Education system, introduction of the western style education system that created a class of english speaking indians often alienated from the wider population. Political impact, centralized administration, establishment of a unified administrative system with british officials holding significant power. Rise of indian nationalism, the experience of colonial oppressions like led to the growth of Indian nationalist movements seeking self-rule. The negative aspect of British rule. Those are negative aspects, that is widespread poverty and famines. Colonial policies contributed to severe famine due to inadequate food distribution and exploitation of the peasantry. Exploitation of Indian labor. Indian workers were often subjected to harsh working conditions in plantations and mines. Divide and rule tactics. British often played different Indian groups against each other and maintained control. Positive aspects, that is modern infrastructure development, the construction of railroads, telecommunication network, and irrigation system has the modern infrastructure development. Legal reforms, introduction of the codified legal system based on British law. Social reform movements, British rule provided a platform for Indian reformers to challenge traditional social practices. Now, further, we'll read about detail about impact of British rule in India. The British rule in India, spanning nearly 2 centuries, left a profound and multifaceted impact on the subcontinent. From its establishment in the mid 18th century to its eventual culmination in 1947. British colonialism shaped various aspects of Indian society, economy, culture, and governance. This transformative period brought positive and negative consequences, significantly altering the course of Indian history and setting the stage for its subsequent journey as an independent nation. Examining the diverse impact of British rule provides a nuanced understanding of the complexities and legacies that continue to influence India's trajectory in the modern world. Now, impact on society and culture. Indian society underwent many changes after the advent of the Britishers in India in the 19th century. Social practice like female infanticide, child marriage, Sati, polygamy, and the caste system were prevalent. Women were discriminated against at all stages of life. British brought new ideas of liberty, equality, and freedom from the Renaissance, the European Reformation movement. These ideas appealed to some sections of society. The movement, led by leaders like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, and Aruna Asaf Ali, looked for the social unity and strive towards liberty, equality, and fraternity. Introduced to improve the status of women, for example, the prohibition of sati in 1829 by Lord Bentinck. In 1872, the law that legalized intercaste and communal marriage was passed. Slavery was declared illegal. With Iswar Chandra Vidyasagar's assistance, the Widow Marriage Act was passed by Lord Dalhousie in 1856. Vidyasagar also campaigned against child marriage and polygamy. The cruel custom of offering little children as a sacrifice to please God, practiced by certain tribes, was banned by Governor General Lord Hardinge. Economic impact of British rule. Deindustrialization. The Charter Act of 1813 allowed one-way free trade for British citizens, which flooded the Indian market with cheap, machine made goods from Britain. On the other hand, heavy duties were levied on imports from India to Britain. As high as 80% were imposed on Indian textiles, which made Indian cloth expensive. After 1820, Indian exports were virtually barred from the European markets. Ruralization. The Charter Act of 1813 allowed one-way free trade for British citizens, which flooded the Indian market with cheap, machine-made goods from Britain. On the other hand, heavy duties were levied on imports from India to Britain. Ruralization. The decline of the decline of industries increased the trend towards ruralization in India. The loss of traditional livelihood led to many artisans leaving their professions and moving to villages. There was increased pressure on land as most of these artisans were concentrated in agriculture. An overburdened agricultural sector upset the village's economic setup. Im- Impoverishment of peasantry. British made numerous attempts at land revenue initiatives that needed to be made easier for the farmers. They collected taxes on the farmers to fund the policies and the war effort. The government enforced the permanent settlement system in significant portion of maximize rent and ensure its revenue share. Tenants were uneasy due to the transferability of the land. The government made few efforts to improve the productivity of the land. As zamindars gained more authority, they raised the money they received from the unlawful dues. Commercialization of agriculture. The introduction of many commercial crops like coffee, indigo, cotton, jute, and opium was another significant economic influences of British policies. These plants were introduced with certain goals in mind. Indians were forced to produce indigo and sell it under British imposed restrictions. It was exported to England, where it was utilized as a dyeing ingredient for fabric made in British cities. Rise of new money lending classes. Excessive demand for revenues by the British government forced the peasants to take loans from the money lenders. These money lenders exploited the peasants by charging a high rate of interest. They often used unfair means like false accounting. In most cases, the peasants failed to repay the loan with full interest and their lands were passed to the money lenders' hands. It's very cruel. Transport and communication. To improve the movement of British goods, the British people built railroads to link inland regions with exporting ports, which gives British bankers and investors a mean to spend more money and resources on building railroads. This this benefited the British capitalists in two ways. Firstly, it made trading in commodities easier and more profitable. Secondly, the rail engine coaches came from Britain, where the British capitalists invested the rails and was guaranteed a minimum profit of 5% by the government. The railways also played an important role in the national awakening of the country. Famine and poverty. The famine becomes a regular feature in India. These families were caused due to poverty unleashed by the colonial forces in India and lack of food grains, textile industry and trade. Asia and Africa were markets for Indian textiles. The course of the textile trade was turned with the industrialization of England and the colonization of India. Machine made clothing from English companies was heavily imported. The threat to the handicraft sector has grown due to this import. Education policy. The introduction of the English language in India by the British was aimed at preparing Indians for roles as low wage clerks under British administration. This strategy was intended to minimize administrative cost and cultivate a class of Indian loyal to the British regime. Simultaneously, it aimed to expand the market for British goods within India. The Charter Act 1813 allocated rupees 1 lakh to promote Western science in India, primarily through the English language media. In 1854, the Woods Dispatch recommended that the government take responsibility for educating the masses. This led to establishing education department in all provinces and establishing affiliated universities in Calcutta, Madras and Bombay in 1857. The English language and Western ideas brought about positive changes in society. Visionaries like Swami Vivekananda and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar employed concepts of liberalism and democracy from the West to reform social and religious practices. This shift led to modern, rational, democratic, and liberal perspective among the Indians. English became a common medium among the educational populations, fostering political awareness and knowledge of democratic principles. It facilitated studies in England, allowing the Indian to learn about the functioning of democratic institutions. Overall, the British introduced and introductions of English and Western ideas had a multifaceted impact on India, ranging from administrative motives to social reforms and intellectual employment. Judicial system. The Britishers introduced a new system of law and justice in India. Hierarchy of civil and criminal courts was established. The laws were qualified and attempts were made to separate the judiciary from the executives. Efforts were taken to establish the rule of law in India. However, these law courts were not easily accessible to the common people. Justice became costly, and the new judicial system discriminated between the Europeans and the Indians. Achieve your goal with our mentorship program, offering regular guidance and effective exam strategies. Cultivate a focused mindset for exam success through our mentorship program. The positive and negative impact of the British rule in India. In short notes, we'll see this one. Positive impact of British rule in India. In 1872, the law legalized intercaste and intercommunal marriage. Slavery was made illegal with Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar's help. The Widow Remarriage Act was enacted by Lord Dalhousie. Governor General Lord Harding prohibited the cruel practice of sacrificing children to appease deities among certain tribes. The British introduced railway to connect inland areas, which was pivotal in the nation's awakening. The British introduced a new system of law and justice, establishing a hierarchy of civil and criminal courts. British influences brought ideas of liberty, equality, and freedom from the European Renaissance and Reformation movement, reasoning with some society segments. English was introduced, establishing educational departments in provinces and affiliated universities in Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay in 1857. The English language and Western ideas positively impacted society with leaders like Swami Vivekananda and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Negative aspect. Industries declining prompted to move towards rural life in India. Artisans left traditional work for villages due to lost livelihoods and straining land due to an influx of agricultural workers. The Charter Act of 1813 allowed one-way free trade for Britons flooding India with cheap British goods while taxing Indian imports heavily, particularly textiles. The permanent settlement aimed for maximizing rent and securing revenue but created tenant insecurity due to land transferability. Introducing commercial crops like coffee, indigo, cotton, jute, and opium led to landless laborers as ownership shifted rapidly. The British built railways connected inland areas, aiding British exports for allowing investments by British capitalists. Famines become common due to colonial induced poverty and lack of food grains. England's industrialization and India's colonization reversed the textile trade, importing machine-made clothes and endangering handicrafts. So far, we discussed about impact of British Raj in India. We have done. Please subscribe our YouTube channel.